In today's episode, I'm exploring something that comes up surprisingly often in my conversations with senior leaders. It's the experience of doing all the things that are supposed to restore your energy. Giving yourself the gift of a weekend, taking that holiday, even consistently getting the 8 hours of sleep. And yet somehow you're still waking up feeling tired. Now, many leaders assume that this simply comes with the territory of responsibility, right? That carrying complex decisions, people, and outcomes always comes with a certain level of ongoing fatigue. But what if the issue isn't your capacity to lead? In this episode, I'm introducing a concept I call the restoration gap. And by the end of our conversation, you might start to see why rest doesn't always restore in the way that we expect it to. More importantly, you're going to understand the biological conditions that actually allow your energy, your clarity, and your resilience as a leader to rebuild. So if you've ever taken time off and wondered why it didn't quite work the way it was supposed to, then this episode is for you. Let's get started, shall we? Welcome to Project Joyful, the podcast for health-centered leaders. Project Joyful is a space for conversations at the intersection of leadership, health, and lived experience. Here we explore what it means to lead in ways that honor your body, protect long-term capacity, and support a life that feels as good on the inside as it looks on the outside. This episode is part of the Biology of Leadership series. In this series, we explore leadership through your body, not as a performance to optimize or a mindset to fix, but as a biological experience shaped over time. Leadership doesn't just live in decisions, strategies, or roles. It lives in your nervous system and how responsibility is held and how reliability and care quietly organize your body long before you're consciously aware of it. These conversations are for leaders who are capable, trusted, and effective, and who are curious about how leadership is experienced internally, not just how it performs externally. There's nothing you need to do as you listen, no insight you need to apply. This is simply an invitation to understand what's been shaping your experience of leadership beneath the surface and what's become possible when biology becomes part of the conversation. Let's begin, shall we? So there's a quiet leadership puzzle that I've been noticing more and more in the women I work with. Now, these are women who are incredibly capable. They're disciplined and they're thoughtful about how they manage their energy. They take the holiday when they need to. They close the laptop on the weekend. Many of them are even quite intentional about getting a good night's sleep. And yet something still doesn't quite reset. Now, I'm not talking about that dramatic exhaustion, not the kind of burnout that forces you to stop. It's way subtler than that, which is part of why it's so confusing. You see, what we often describe is a feeling that their system never fully powers down. They might wake up in the morning already aware of the day ahead running quietly in the background, or they come back from time off expecting that sense of mental spaciousness to return, only to notice that the same decisions, responsibilities, and mental load they're sitting exactly where they left them. It feels like they never had a holiday at all. And sometimes it shows up physically, right? A tightness through the chest before the day's really begun. A mind that starts organizing the next set of problems before the first coffee is even finished brewing. Or a kind of low-grade tiredness that sleep should have fixed, but somehow it didn't. And nothing's dramatically wrong. They're still performing. They're still leading. They're still delivering. They never quite feel restored. And when this continues for long enough, many leaders start to quietly assume that this must simply be the cost of leadership. That carrying this level of responsibility just means living with a certain level of ongoing fatigue, especially if you're managing a family as well. But what our coaching conversations have been revealing is actually something quite different. And what many of these women are actually experiencing is something that I call the restoration gap. So the restoration gap is the distance between stopping activity and actually restoring your biology. Because when you're leading at a senior level, carrying responsibility for people, for outcomes and decisions, stopping work doesn't automatically mean that your body has shifted into repair. So you can take the holiday, you can close the laptop, you can even get that sleep. And biologically, restoration may still not have begun. So once we understand why that happens, leadership starts to look very different. So before I talk about the biology behind this, it helps to notice where the restoration gap actually shows up in your everyday life. Because most of the time, it appears in moments that are supposed to feel restorative. And often it's incredibly subtle. It's not always something dramatic or obvious. Sometimes it's simply a quiet sense that something feels slightly off, but you can't quite explain why. You're functioning, you're still delivering, and in many cases, you're probably over-delivering. From the outside, everything looks like strong leadership, and yet internally, there's a faint sense that your energy never quite reset the way you hoped it would. So let's say you're on a staycation, right? You take a week off work and you get to enjoy your own pillows and your own bed, a leisurely start to the day, coffee with the paper at your favorite cafe. You've planned it out, and the intention is genuinely to slow down and give yourself space. But every couple of days, you find yourself doing a quick scan of the work inbox. Just 5 minutes on your work phone, just to stay on top of things. And logically, that makes sense, right? It feels responsible. It feels like you're preventing problems from building up while you're away. But psychologically, something interesting happens in that moment. Even a quick check-in tells your brain that work is still active. That thread never fully closes. So instead of your system fully letting go of work for the week, part of your attention stays quietly tethered to it. Or maybe you're a fan of the Sunday afternoon catch-up. It might have started as a one-off thing during a particularly busy period, but for some reason it seems to have morphed into a weekly routine. Just opening that laptop briefly to get ahead of Monday, right? A quick review of the inbox, tidying up a few things so that the week starts smoothly. Again, it feels efficient, it feels proactive, but it also means that your system never experiences a full boundary between work and recovery. And then there's the experience that so many leaders find the most confusing, which is the sleep that should have fixed it. You wake up in the morning and you check your fitness tracker and it tells you that you got the requisite 8 hours of sleep. On paper, everything looks perfect. And yet, when that alarm goes off inside, or maybe externalizing as well, right? You're groaning. Your first thought of the day is simply, oh, I'm so tired. Did I actually get any sleep? You reach for your phone and you check your sleep data. Yep, you did. 8 hours, exactly what you were supposed to get. But your eyes still feel heavy. Your body feels slow to get moving. And the energy you expected to wake up with, well, it just isn't quite there. The sleep happened. Your watch says it did. But it doesn't feel like your energy actually came back. And it's interesting because on paper, each of these moments look like rest, right? But biologically, something different might still be happening. Because your body doesn't restore simply because activity stops. Restoration actually requires a specific biological state. And when that state hasn't been reached, your body can pause without actually repairing. And that's where the restoration gap begins to appear. So what's actually going on here? Well, one of the things that often surprises leaders when we start unpacking this is that restoration doesn't begin simply because work stops or because your calendar suddenly has space in it. Restoration begins when your nervous system shifts into a biological state that allows your body to move out of readiness and into repair, regulation, and replenishment. And for many high-performing leaders, that shift doesn't happen automatically. You see, when you've spent years carrying responsibility for people, for decisions, for outcomes, and that constant flow of information that comes with leadership, your nervous system becomes highly practiced at maintaining a subtle state of readiness. It's not the kind of stress we associate with panic or overwhelm. It's much quieter than that. It's the background vigilance that allows you to anticipate problems, to track multiple moving parts, and to stay mentally one step ahead of what might happen next. And for a long time, that vigilance is exactly what made you effective as a leader. It helped you stay across complex situations, respond quickly when things changed, and carry a level of responsibility that, quite frankly, others relied on you for. And the important thing to understand here is that this capacity doesn't disappear when you learn how to restore properly. That awareness and responsiveness remains a strength. But what changes is the hidden cost of running that capability constantly. You see, when your nervous system learns how to stand down properly, the vigilance becomes something you can bring online when it's needed, rather than something your system carries all the time. The result isn't that you become less capable as a leader. In many cases, the opposite happens. Your thinking becomes clearer because your brain isn't running in the background all the time. Your body carries less of the quiet tension that many leaders have normalized. And the people around you, whether that's your team at work or your family at home, they often notice that you're more present because your system isn't constantly holding unfinished responsibility in the background. But your nervous system doesn't automatically switch that pattern off just because the meeting ends or the weekend arrives, right? And this is why many leaders notice something interesting when their calendar suddenly has space in it. Instead of immediately relaxing, it can be a moment of restlessness, a kind of twitchiness in your system. You sit down with an open afternoon and your mind starts looking for something to do with it. You might feel an urge to check messages, to tidy up a few small tasks, or open the laptop, even when nothing urgent's actually required. Now, what's happening in that moment isn't really about productivity. It's your nervous system still operating in a pattern of readiness. When your nervous system remains oriented towards responsibility and anticipation, your body can't fully dedicate its resources to restoration. So the systems responsible for tissue repair, hormonal recalibration, immune maintenance, and neurological recovery work most efficiently when your system perceives safety and stability. If part of your nervous system is still quietly tracking what might need your attention next, then these restorative processes still occur, but they have to share resources with the ongoing work of vigilance. So your body is trying to repair and replenish, but it can't allocate all of its resources to that job because leadership rarely allows long stretches of uninterrupted recovery. The restoration process often never quite catches up before the next wave of responsibility begins. And that's why someone can take time off and still feel tired when they return. It's why weekends sometimes pass without creating the sense of reset that we expected. And it's why even a full night of sleep doesn't always translate into waking up with energy that feels genuinely restored. So the issue isn't simply whether you took the holiday or slept the hours or closed the laptop for the weekend. Many leaders do all of those things. The deeper question is whether your nervous system actually received the signal that it's safe to temporarily stand down from responsibility. If that signal never fully arrives, Your body can pause activity without ever fully completing the restorative work it's supposed to do. And over time, that's what creates the experience many leaders quietly describe as being tired in a way that they can't quite explain. Once you start to understand restoration through this biological lens, leadership begins to look very different. Because sustaining leadership isn't just about managing time or workload. It's about creating the physiological conditions that allow restoration to actually occur. When you start to understand the restoration gap through this biological lens, something important becomes clear. Restoration isn't really about taking better breaks. It's about sustaining leadership. And it's interesting because for a long time, the conversation around rest has been framed almost like a lifestyle preference, something that would be nice to have if your schedule allowed it. But when we look at what is actually happening biologically, restoration turns out to be much more fundamental than that. Your brain does some of its most important leadership work when your nervous system's able to move out of vigilance and complete its restorative cycle. During that cycle, neural networks consolidate information and they integrate what you've been processing throughout the day. So this is where your cognitive clarity begins to return. Decisions that felt tangled the night before suddenly seem straightforward in the morning. You walk into a meeting and you can see the structure of the issue more easily. Instead of mentally juggling 10 moving parts at once, your thinking feels more ordered and you can prioritize what actually matters. At the same time, emotional regulation stabilizes. So in practical terms, this often shows up in small but really important moments. A difficult email arrives and instead of feeling your system tighten immediately, you find that you're able to pause and respond thoughtfully. Or a team member brings you a problem late in the day and you can hold that conversation without feeling like your patience is already depleted. You still care deeply about outcomes, but your reactions are less driven by the accumulated tension of the week. Your body is also recalibrating the systems that allow leadership to continue over long periods of time. Hormones regulate, immune function restores, and the muscular tension that builds through those long hours of concentration and decision-making begin to release. So when that restorative cycle completes, many leaders notice that the constant sense of carrying responsibility in their body begins to ease. And this is often when the shift becomes visible outside of work as well, right? You arrive home and you realize that you're more present with your family. Instead of still mentally replaying the day's decisions while sitting at the dinner table, your attention's actually available for the conversation that's happening right in front of you. When you look at it this way, restoration isn't separate from leadership. It's part of the biological infrastructure that allows leadership to be sustained. And when the restorative cycle is able to complete consistently, the role itself begins to feel a little different. The responsibilities haven't changed, and the complexity of the work's still there, but the internal experience shifts. Many leaders reach this point and realize that the issue was never about their capacity. The issue was the biological conditions their leadership had been operating inside. When leaders begin to close the restoration gap, one of the first things they notice is that leadership itself starts to feel different. The responsibilities are still there, the decisions still need to be made, the pace of work hasn't necessarily slowed down. But their body is no longer carrying the same quiet accumulation of strain that's been building over time. And that often leads to an important realization. You see, the issue was never that they weren't strong enough, disciplined enough, or capable enough to sustain leadership. The issue was that their biology had never been given the conditions it needed to fully restore. And so once you start to understand leadership through that lens, the question changes. It's no longer just about how you manage your time or how efficiently you work. It becomes a question of whether your nervous system's able to complete the restorative cycles that allow your energy, your clarity, and your resilience to rebuild. Because when those cycles begin to complete consistently, leadership stops feeling like something you're constantly pushing yourself through. It becomes something your biology's actually able to support. So if today's conversation resonated with you, I've created a guide called The Biology of Sustainable Leadership. And in this guide, I explore this idea in more depth, and I walk through the biological foundations that allow leaders to sustain clarity, influence, and energy over time. You can download that guide at tracytutty.co.nz/BOL guide. I'm sending you lots of love. Bye for now. Hey, thanks for listening to today's podcast. Can I ask you a favour? If our conversation spoke to you today, could you please take a moment to leave a 5-star review? Your review will help people discover this podcast, and together we can create a world where there's even more love and more laughter. And if you want to hear more from the Project Joyful podcast, just click the subscribe button. Bye for now.